Can consciousness survive the cloud? The upload bar reached 100%. She stared at the screen, unsure whether she had just backed up her memories or begun erasing herself. For months, she'd been archiving everything. Photos that held laughter she could no longer hear. Voice notes from people who'd stopped calling. Entire years compressed into folders labeled by season. Digital permanence felt like insurance against forgetting. But somewhere in the transfer, a question emerged she couldn't delete. What if memory wasn't meant to be perfect? She wasn't alone in this ritual. Millions of us now store more of our lives in the cloud than in our minds. We photograph moments we'll never revisit, record thoughts we'll never replay, and trust servers in distant cities to hold what we can no longer carry. The cloud promised liberation from loss, but it delivered something else entirely, a new kind of forgetting. Neuroscientists have discovered something unsettling about how we form identity. Memory isn't a hard drive, it's a conversation. Every time we recall an experience, we reconstruct it, slightly differently, shaped by who we've become since. The act of remembering changes the memory itself. It's imperfect, biased, and utterly human, but the cloud doesn't forget, it doesn't reshape, it doesn't grow. She scrolled through a photo from 5 years ago, a birthday dinner she barely remembered attending. The image was flawless, her smile was bright, but the feeling that once lived inside that moment, gone, replaced by the photograph itself. The memory had become its documentation. When did we start trusting pixels more than presence? Researchers at Stanford ran a study on digital memory. They found that people who extensively photograph experiences retain fewer sensory details than those who simply observe. The camera becomes a cognitive outsourcing device. We stop encoding the warmth of the room, the cadence of a voice, the way light moved across a face. We assume the photo will remember for us, but the photo only captures what the lens saw, never what we felt. She thought about her grandfather, who died before smartphones existed. His stories were worn smooth by retelling, details shifting like sand, but the emotional core never wavered. He remembered less, factually, but he inhabited his past more fully than she inhabited hers. Maybe memory was never about accuracy, maybe it was about meaning. The cloud offers us immortality of data, but consciousness isn't data. It's context, it's contradiction, it's the way a scent can resurrect a decade in an instant. It's the embarrassment of remembering yourself differently than you were. It's forgetting the small things so the important ones can breathe. She wondered if she was outsourcing not just memory, but the work of being human. There's a concept in philosophy called extended mind. The idea that our consciousness doesn't stop at our skulls. Our tools, our environments, even our relationships become part of how we think. The notebook where you write ideas, the map you navigate by, the friend who remembers what you forget, all extensions of cognition. But here's the paradox. When memory becomes too extended, too externalized, do we risk becoming extensions of our devices instead? She opened her Photos app. 43,000 images, a decade of documentation. She couldn't remember taking most of them. They existed more than the moments that birthed them. The archive had outlived the archivist's attention. Somewhere in the accumulation, presence had been traded for proof. A psychologist named Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, wrote that meaning comes not from avoiding suffering, but from choosing what to carry forward. Memory, he believed, was an act of will, selecting what shapes us, letting go of what doesn't. Forgetting wasn't failure, it was discernment. But the cloud strips us of that choice. It remembers everything indiscriminately, and so we scroll through our lives like strangers, touring a museum of someone we used to be. She thought about the moments she didn't photograph, the ones that lived only in her body's recall. A conversation in a parked car at 3 a.m., the weight of her daughter's head on her shoulder, the exact tone of her mother's voice saying her name. These memories were fading, yes. Imperfect, absolutely, but they were hers in a way the cloud could never replicate. Because consciousness isn't about storage, it's about transformation. When her hard drive crashed 2 years ago, she panicked. Thousands of files, gone. She spent weeks trying to recover them, convinced she'd lost irreplaceable pieces of herself. But after the grief subsided, something unexpected happened. She started remembering differently. Without the photos to anchor her to a fixed past, her memories became more fluid, more emotionally textured. She stopped performing her life for the archive and started living it for the experience. The loss had been a strange kind of gift. This isn't a manifesto against technology. The cloud serves us in countless ways: collaboration, access, preservation of history that matters. But when it comes to consciousness, to the inner architecture of who we are, maybe we've confused backup with being. A researcher at MIT studies what she calls digital hoarding, the compulsive saving of everything because deletion feels like death. But she's found that people who curate their digital lives, who intentionally let go, report deeper connection to the memories they choose to keep. Less is more embodied. The consciousness that survives isn't the one that archives everything. It's the one that metabolizes experience into wisdom. She started an experiment. Once a week she deleted 100 photos, not the bad ones, the redundant ones. 7 versions of the same sunset. 40 screenshots she'd never revisit, the digital clutter that obscured more than it revealed. At first it felt like violence, then it felt like breathing. With each deletion she noticed something return. Attention, the willingness to be in a moment without immediately documenting it, the trust that her mind, imperfect as it was, could hold what truly mattered. She began to suspect that memory wasn't about holding on, it was about composting, taking in experience, letting it break down, integrating what nourished growth, releasing the rest. The cloud couldn't do that. It could only accumulate. But she could choose differently. One afternoon her daughter asked to see photos from her childhood. She opened the folder, carefully curated now, not exhaustive. 50 images instead of 5,000. And because there were fewer, they looked at each one longer. Her daughter asked questions the photos couldn't answer. And in trying to answer, she discovered memories she didn't know she still carried. The act of retrieval without the crutch of perfect documentation changed both of them. They weren't viewing the past. They were co-creating it, together, in the present. Her daughter's consciousness was extending through her imperfect telling. The story was alive again. That's when she understood. Consciousness doesn't survive in the cloud. It survives in transmission. In the messy, beautiful act of one human trying to share their inner world with another. The researchers who study memory and meaning have found something profound. The stories we tell about our lives matter more than the facts we preserve. 2 people can experience the same event and, through different retellings, become entirely different people. Narrative, not data, shapes identity. And narrative requires forgetting. It requires emphasis and omission. It requires the courage to say, this meant something, and this didn't. The cloud can't make those distinctions. Only consciousness can. She thinks now about what it means to age in the digital era. Previous generations lost their memories gradually, naturally, to time. They had no choice but to trust the stories that remained. But her generation faces a different challenge, drowning in documentation while starving for meaning. Every notification is a memory deferred. Every photo is presence postponed. Every upload is a small abdication of the work of being here, now, alive. What surprised her most wasn't how the analog journal she started using improved her mental clarity, but how it redefined what remembering meant to her. I wasn't expecting a tool to change my relationship with time, and honestly, I returned to it more than once before I understood what actually mattered. Writing by hand, slowly, with no copy-paste safety net, forced me to choose what deserved permanence. This isn't a recommendation, just a reflection that stayed with me. I'll leave the link below if you feel called to explore what I mean. The cursor blinked on the empty page, but now it wasn't waiting for content. It was waiting for intention. She closed her laptop and sat with the silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence. The kind that hums with attention. The kind where consciousness doesn't need to prove itself through documentation. Outside, the sky was doing something beautiful. She almost reached for her phone. Then she stopped. She let her eyes adjust. She let the moment be temporary. She let herself be the only archive that mattered. And in that choice, something survived that the cloud could never hold. Consciousness isn't a file to be backed up. It's a flame to be tended. It flickers. It changes. It requires us to show up repeatedly, imperfectly, present, not as data to be stored, but as beings perpetually becoming. The upload bar reached 100%, but the most important part of her was never in the transfer. It was in the pause before deciding what to upload, in the discernment, in the letting go, in the trust that she could hold what mattered without holding everything. The cloud will keep growing. Our devices will keep offering to remember for us, but consciousness survives not in what we save, but in how we choose. Not in the permanence of pixels, but in the impermanence of presence. Not in the archive, but in the alchemy of turning experience into understanding. She won't stop using the cloud, but she'll stop confusing it with her mind. The question isn't whether consciousness can survive in the cloud. It's whether we can survive becoming the cloud, vast, accessible, perfectly preserved, and utterly empty of the transformation that makes us human. What part of this reflection spoke to you most? And from where are you watching? Let's keep the dialogue open quietly. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.